Hey guys, it's me, Jack24 here, and today as you guys can clearly tell, I've gotten a little bit better from my cold, but I'm still stuck with a bit of a stuffy nose, but hey. So in today's video, we're going to be reacting to the British-American War of 1812, or better known to some Americans as the War of 1812, 12 by Knowledgia. Knowledgia? Knowledgia? However you pronounce it. I'll provide a link in the description down below, but for now I'm going to be also skipping the ads in this video, and and we'll we'll see it from there. Alright. Anyways, let's begin.
1812, the young nation of the United States took on the country with the most powerful navy in the world in a war that would affect more than just the former colonies and their colonizer. The United States of America first gained freedom from the British in an 8-year-long Revolutionary War that finally came to a close when Britain inevitably recognized the independence of their 13 former colonies on September 3rd, 1783. One of the most relevant impacts of this war that would fuel future tensions between the US and Britain once again.
Um, yeah, there's a couple of future wars that we had with Britain. And I believe this is mainly one of the larger ones, unless I'm forgetting some of the other wars. But, I mean, unless if it's together with, fighting with Britain, then that's both World War One and World War Two. But I don't remember off the top of my head of when Britain actually fought the U.S. after the War of 1812. And keep in mind, most Americans are just skimmed over. Well, actually, some Americans, I wouldn't say most, but a good portion of Americans, sounds good enough, practically aren't exactly aware of the War of 1812, so let's continue with this. And keep in mind, I still have a cold while I'm doing this video. Yeah. Anyways, let's continue.
Was the role of the Native Americans. And as a fan of our channel, you should check out our...
No, I'm going to skip over their Patreon. Nope. And about here.
During the Revolution, the Native Americans mostly supported the Brits, who they hoped would continue to restrict expansion from the U.S. settlers into Native American territory.
I'm sorry, Native Americans, but once the U.S. started going for land, unfortunately, yeah, uh, blame Andrew Jackson for the massacres that would happen a tiny bit later. Don't blame us for what happened. Actually, you can blame us for what happened. We practically took it right then and there. And also that we're sorry that we took over your land and stuff, but how do I, yeah, it was how do I explain it? I'll just leave it as it is.
Britain failed to maintain its rule over the colonies. The United States eventually accelerated its takeover of native land, causing even more friction between the American societies.
Actually, the territory was actually given to the Americans practically due to what was it? It was due to the peace treaty, and I'm forgetting which city in France it was. Was it in Versailles? No, that was one. Uh, Anyways, just give me this. Hold on. Let me just get some water. Ah. Alright, now I got it. Alright, now I think I can go. Oh, I'm pretty sure it was Para, if I wasn't mistaken, in which Great Britain gave us a good portion of land. Because yes, that's what the British Empire was called back then.
This friction only grew stronger as the years went on, as Britain remained a driving force of the discord. Not only had the natives taken its side in the revolution, but the British also openly encouraged the Native Americans to fight back against their antagonists. By 1812, this, combined with a few other factors, led to the development of a new war. While the United States was clearly unhappy with the united opposition from Britain and the natives, they were also infuriated by allegations that the Royal Navy was utilizing a tactic known as impressment to take U.S. men for their own troops. On top
Yeah, to be fair, that's kind of a horrible move on Britain's part.
of this, the ongoing strife between Britain and France had a note.
Ooh, the most famous picture of Napoleon. Is that George the Third or Second? No, no. Yeah, that's George the Third or Fourth. One of the two. Do either one, you can correct me somewhere in the comments on which one it is. Well, in this picture, you can tell me which one it is. I know this is Napoleon.
Impact on the United States. Heavily locked in their own struggle, the warring nations tried to restrict trade from neutral countries and punish anyone who attempted to ignore the constraints. This put the United States in a detrimental position due to their inability to continue trade with either nation unless they wanted to risk invoking the wrath of the other side.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that at this point in time, the US wasn't exactly the military powerhouse as it is nowadays. As back then, the US was quite, not exactly weak, but it didn't become into a more of a military superpower until like during World War One and afterwards. But still, during some part of World War Two, the US was kind of not exactly as strong as it is now, but it kept on going. I'm dying of phlegm. Phlegm, I think.
France took a more laid-back approach to ensure the U.S. abstained from doing business with the British. The latter was more aggressive about the matter. On January 7th, 1807, Britain issued an order in council stating, "It is hereby ordered that no vessel shall be permitted to trade from one port to another, both which ports shall belong to or be in the possession of France or her allies, or shall be so far under their control as the British vessels may not freely trade. Furthermore, any ships that refuse to obey these restrictions would be subject to seizure by the Royal Navy, cargo and all." By November, the original order was expanded, now to include all the ports and places of France and her allies, or of any other country at war with His Majesty, and all other ports or places in Europe, from which, although not at war with His Majesty, the British flag is excluded, and all ports or places in the colonies belonging to His Majesty's enemies. In retaliation, France, under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte, issued the Milan Decree, which said that every ship,
Why is the war? No.
whatever.
Why is the overture of 1812 playing in the background? That was the overture of 1812 tells the story of Napoleon's invasion of Russia, which, if you did not know, kind of backfired on Napoleon severely.
that shall have submitted to be searched by an English ship or to a voyage to England, or shall have paid any tax whatsoever to the English government, is thereby, and for that alone, declared to be denationalized, to have forfeited the protection of its king, and to have become English property. Adding on, Napoleon declared that any of the aforementioned ships that enter French ports or those of French allies are good and lawful prizes of his nation. Forced to reply, U.S. President Thomas Jefferson signed the Embargo Act in December of 1807, blocking all international trade from American ports and taking direct aim at Britain. Unfortunately for America, the act backfired and turned the U.S. into more of a victim than anyone else. Emphasizing this point, the Minister to France himself even said, "Here it is not felt, and in England it is forgotten." The effects of the Embargo Act ultimately pushed the U.S. into an economic depression, and it had to be repealed less than 2 years after the initial signature. In its place, the Non-Intercourse Act was passed, which directly forbade trade with Britain and France and their colonies. When this new act still proved to be ineffective, the United States tried once again, this time passing Macon's Bill No. 2 in May of 1810. This bill lifted trading bans and stated that if either France or Britain removed their own restrictions, the U.S. would re-establish an embargo with the opposing nation. By August, Napoleon enacted a plan to exacerbate tension between Britain and the United States, and it ultimately worked. He first told the new president, James Madison, that he intended to exempt the U.S. from his previously established Berlin and Milan decrees, promoting Madison to bring back the Non-Intercourse Act.
Wait, hold on. I'm just going to read this real quick. Napoleon's plan to isolate the United Kingdom. The Berlin Decree proclaimed that the British Isles are declared to be a state of blockade and... Oh, wait, hold on. Is this just his blockade of Europe? Oh, yeah, that is the... I believe that is the blockade.
Constraints against Britain in November of that year, despite the fact that Napoleon never actually followed through on his proclamation. Britain and the United States were now on the brink of all-out war. The final straw came when the Battle of Tippecanoe unfolded in late 1811, as the U.S. troops claimed victory over the Native Americans, wishing to stop further expansion once again. Given the United States was fairly confident in the belief that the British were supplying the natives with weapons from Canada, a faction of the U.S. Republican Party known as the Warhawks began a heavy push towards an official declaration of war. At last, on June 18, 1812, President James Madison signed the Declaration against Britain, despite contention about the issue coming from both the House and Senate.
So, as I'm about to tell you, as this would be kind of a bit awkward for both the U.S. and the UK for and just a couple. Well, the video is about to get to it, but since I kind of went into somewhat of more analysis into it when I had to figure out what to study, spending my free time for some portion of the pandemic, because hey, I needed to buy my time with something until I was done. So studied a bit and more on something. Turns out that this was about to kind of be a bit awkward for Britain and a bit awkward for the U.S. on how this started out besides the Native American campaigns.
A problem emerged as well when Britain decided to suddenly repeal their trade restrictions before news of the U.S. declaration of war actually reached the British over a month later. Aware of this delay, Britain decided not to immediately respond to the call of war and waited to see how the Americans would react to their repeals. When the U.S. got wind of this surprising development, they were, in turn, unsure of how the Brits would react to their declaration of war. Ultimately, the United States
Well, As you can see, that must have been extremely awkward. It's like, the whole reason the US was declaring war on Britain was due to the other besides the Native American stuff. Well, as the person who's narrating this video, not me, the other guy who's narrating the video that I'm reacting to, is practically saying, well, practically that both the US and the UK are just waiting at this point to see what was going to happen with one another, and Americans acted first.
To follow through on his proclamation and did so by invading Canada, which was a British colony at the time. While the American troops hoped to capture Canadian land to force Britain into negotiation, they had no such success. No one was prepared for war. The British and French have been busy fighting their own battles, and the U.S. military
The Napoleonic Wars, which we actually covered in my oversimplified video reactions, which y'all can check out. But for now, let's go and just dying a bit of my own phlegm. But hey, I'm at least still alive.
was grossly ill-suited to take on the likes of Britain. The defeats were plenty and humiliating for the Americans. One excessively humbling loss for the U.S. happened when General William Hull surrendered Fort Detroit on August 16, 1812, and his own army to the British troops, and allowed Michigan Territory to be deemed as part of Britain.
To be fair, I completely forgot that Detroit was a fort. And also, I forgot that Cleveland was also a fort, too. Wow, I am just remembering so much different stuff now.
Across the Canadian border, as Hull saw the size of his opponent's forces, which was a mix of British and Native American troops, and knowing that his daughter and grandchild were in the fort, he decided to give up without a single shot being fired. Hull
Still, would we hold him accountable for doing that, though? And would we now, since he practically surrendered? Would we place him under treason or something? Someone tell me in the comments down below.
Disgraceful failure led to an uptick in Native American raids in the Northwest and British conflict under the command of Major General Henry Proctor. Adding insult to injury, U.S. Brigadier General Henry Dearborn struggled to make any progress on the northeastern border because the militias in New England were not supportive of the war and uninterested in coming together for an attack on Montreal. By October, the Americans were finally able to get some momentum as Major General Stephen von Rensselaer led an army of 3,100 militiamen into the Battle of Queenston Heights. Rensselaer sent some advanced units across the river where they were able to hold their ground for some time on a slope just above Queenston and were successful until they were overcome by British forces as the rest of the American troops refused to join the fight. 925 U.S. soldiers were then captured by the British, despite Major General Isaac Brock on the British side being killed during the battle. Yet again, the Americans took another hit in 1813 when an attempt to retake Detroit resulted in a massacre of U.S. prisoners by their Native American opponents. On top of that, Brigadier General
Well, time to see what our generals have to do now.
Dearborn was replaced by Major General James Wilkins. At long last, though, in September of 1813, U.S. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry scored a major naval victory at Lake Erie against the forces of British Captain Robert Barclay and opened the gates for more success on the American side. When the Battle of the Thames erupted the following month, the U.S. finally defeated the British and Native American Allied forces. The next spring season, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, a U.S. militia force faced off with a Native American force known as the Red Sticks and found victory once again, demanding that the losing side cede roughly 23 million acres of land, which would later become Alabama and spanned partially into Georgia. Another win for the United States followed in the summer, July of 1814, at the Battle of Chippewa, but it was short-lived, as the Battle of Lundy's Lane ended in a bloody stalemate shortly after, forcing the Americans to withdraw. The real deciding factor in the war came when Napoleon faced his first exile, allowing
Well, due to, well, let's face it, due to at this point Napoleon getting pretty much beat by the rest of the European powers, had to been sent away. This is more covered in my Napoleonic War videos. Check it out. Check it out, and yes, it's when I reacted to it by Oversimplified. Basically, now with Britain's attention out of Europe because there's no longer a major threat for Britain at that point, which was supposedly Napoleon. Now that Britain can focus their attention on the US in this war, which is going to be kind of bad for the US, and let's go.
Britain to shift more focus to the discord with the United States. The British sliced through the US, destroying government buildings, including the White House, as they took control of Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's right. So during during the War of 1812, as as they just said that the British did indeed burn down the White House, and also that one thing that I should say that they practically also marched into the Capitol building and placed the British flag there, or the Union Jack flag as the British flag. Well, I guess the United Kingdom flag is known by its modern day name, or back then name of the Union Jack was placed there, and yeah, we practically took it back though.
It's then tried to push farther into Baltimore by September under the authority of General Robert Ross, but were repulsed at the Battle of North Point, where General Ross was killed. In the battle that inspired the U.S. national anthem, more British troops were fought on.
Oh, that's right. We were not a lot of people actually believe that. Well, actually, a good portion of the Americans that I know of, which which I guess aren't exactly heavy historians, but I guess sorry about that, my throat's feeling dry. I swear that I need to get a humidifier or something to make this air feel less dry. Anyway, so during the battle at Fort McHenry, I'm forgetting what the exact battle name was. I'm and now I'm forgetting who the poet's name was as well. But oh, I'm pretty sure it was F. Scott Fitzgerald, I believe. Or someone can correct me in the comments down below if I got that name right or wrong. But basically, he was a prisoner on one of the British ships in the harbor. I'm pretty sure that this was either the prison ship here or here in this painting here. Here, and they were attacking the fort, and the large flag of the Star Spangled Banner kept waving, and during through the full verse of the American national anthem. By full verse, I mean all. Like I don't mean like just shortened one where is actually the most common one that you hear. But if you actually hear the 5 minute one, you practically hear on how much more of the poem there is but it's still giving the same message. But basically, it's saying that due to the dark night sky, that the prisoner ship couldn't exactly see who's winning or losing, whether or not if the British took over the fort or not. But when dawn revealed, and with the bomb as a lyric of the American national anthem, his bomb bursting through the air, in which gave proof to us that our flag was still there, which was saying that during the night, all the cannon bombs or other bombs, like they're not exactly modern day, but you get the idea. Kept on showing us that the flag was still there.
At Fort McHenry, as these conflicts raged on, peace talks began in Ghent and eventually resulted in a signed treaty on December 24th, 1814. Still, just as with the declaration of war, the news was delayed and took until February 18th, 1815 to officially be ratified and end the war. The Treaty of Ghent reverted things back mostly to how they were before the combat, with a status quo antebellum. All territory was returned. Britain repealed their trade restrictions, stopped supporting the Native American revolts, and ended their impressment strategies. In the end, the war.
Now, I'm about to give you a bit of an insight on how I view this as a Canadian American on who won the War of 1812, since Canada views it as their victory, meanwhile, the US views it as their victory. And since I'm Canadian American, well, my family is Canadian American. I have not personally been in Canada yet at all. Yeah, sorry, just needed to drink more water. Yeah, I really need to get a humidifier in here. It's like the air is so dry. It's like no wonder, no wonder it's getting weirder. All right.
Was essentially a draw, and the only real losing side was the Native Americans.
Yep. And now here comes the confusing victory sides.
With high hopes for British help in stopping US expansion, Britain was able to claim victory against the French and, in a way, against the US. Meanwhile, the US had the pride of more or less winning their second war of independence.
Well, it's a mixture of the US won and Great Britain and Canada won. It's a mixture of both sides won, but unfortunately that the Native Americans sort of lost the war. It's like neither the United Kingdom or at this point, or the colony of Canada, which was mainly fighting this, won, nor did the U.S. itself win, which is a bummer though. But still, both nations did place up a very good fight against each other. So, in my opinion, both sides had lost, but both sides had won. But I view it, especially as a Canadian American, as both that the Americans had won the battles of the partially bit though of, well, a good portion of the land battles and defending, but I would have to say that the British sort of won a good portion of these battles for Detroit and stuff. But overall, I would say that's about it. Anyways, don't worry, I'm fine. So remember, all of the copyright belongs to Knowledgia, and there will be an original link to the video in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.